Good morning, members of the public. Let me call to order our 71st public meeting. I serve as chair of the commission. I will begin the meeting by taking a roll call of the commissioners. Commissioner Baker, please.
Good morning, President.
Commissioner Bluestone.
I'm here. Good morning.
Commissioner Calderon.
I'm here. Good morning, all.
Good morning, Commissioner Crispin.
Good morning. I am here.
Commissioner Hall.
Good morning, President.
Commissioner Keserosian.
Good morning, President.
Commissioner Luma.
Good morning, President.
Commissioner Talley.
Morning, President.
We have all commissioners present. We obviously have a quorum. Let me turn next to, I would entertain a motion for approval of the minutes of our November 20th, 2025 meeting. Is there such a motion?
I'll make
Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Let me take a vote on that. Commissioner Baker?
I was not present for that meeting.
Commissioner Bluestone?
Yes.
Commissioner Calderon?
Yes.
Commissioner Crispin?
Yes.
Commissioner Hall?
Yes.
Commissioner Keserosian?
Yes.
Commissioner Luma?
Yes.
And Commissioner Talley?
Yes.
I also, and I approve that as well. So that's unanimously carried by those in attendance. Turn next to our executive director report. Enrique, please, and Attorney Hall as well.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good morning, Commissioners. I will share my screen in a moment to guide you through my report. If you give me a minute, can everybody see the first slide of my report? Thank you. As part of my report today, Commissioners, I will just give you a summary of the major milestones of calendar year 25 and some of the projects that we have contemplated for 2026. This is a very brief summary of some larger presentation that we discussed at a staff meeting that did include the attendance of a couple of commissioners, some of our hearing officers, and perhaps more importantly, a lot more of that detail that I will only summarize today will be included in our annual report, which we started to work on with an eye towards publishing all of those results from 2025 sometime in the middle of March. We, as a reminder, those in attendance, we don't take public comment at our public meetings, but we very much appreciate any written comments, especially written comments that you submit at any of those resources on the screen, our website, and our main number and our email. I will note that we did receive a letter yesterday, in the evening, that it did not make it into the packet, but I will be speaking about that as part of the item later in the agenda relative to the advisory committee. With that, let me just, as I mentioned, provide you with the milestones for the year 2025 and some of what we're contemplating for 2026. I will close this part of my report with an administrative update. Eric Rebello-Pradas will have a finance budget update as an item that comes later in the agenda. So during 2025, we onboarded a total of 7 individuals, bringing the headcount of employees to 51. This does represent a slowdown in the rate of hiring as compared to prior years, but it's important to note that we continue to grow given the demands for the work that we do. We continued enhancements to technology, implemented new workflows, notably around the process that we discussed at the Commission during the year, which is that designation of the certification designation of individuals in a restricted category or where their certification is expired. This represented additional internal coordination and communications with agencies, but an important part of what we do. We processed 562 new certifications, 7,913 recertification applications, and began moving everyone to a certification expiration that coincides with the individual's birth month. This is important because, as has been discussed with the Commission, there are, in the long run, there would be very many different expiration dates because of the new academies that come online every month. And by moving everybody to this milestone, keeps our workflow manageable during the year. This year we processed and verified, approximately 23,000 records that were updated or verified in some form or fashion. This is slightly a higher number than the total officers in the state that come under post purview, and that is because we also verify the certification of school resource officers. Suffice to say that our certification team is rather active throughout the year, verifying, updating, and maintaining the records of all officers in the state. We can anticipate that this will be the case every year going forward. Now, during 2025, we continued the release of our disciplinary records through our monthly releases. This year, we published 978 new complaints or incidents, which represented 2,269 allegations. As you know, there's any particular incident typically contains more than a couple of allegations. We started providing something we term complaint summaries. These are what we believe to be fair and concise summaries of the incident that gets reported to us, because many times agencies simply enter a category, for example, that says conduct unbecoming or policy violation without enough details. We have a vested interest in ensuring that these are fair summaries, and we'll continue to fill them out or direct agencies to focus on the quality of the information presented. As is well understood, we review and maintain disciplinary records, but we take action only on a subset of those incidents, a small subset. The number of cases brought to the Commission to discuss in executive session was 160 throughout the year. And that is a slight increase from 2024, where we brought 152 cases to be discussed at Commission meetings. We note that by cases in this case, we mean certain different things. In other words, a particular case could come to the Commission a couple of different times because we bring requests to open a preliminary inquiry. We also bring, of course, the reports of those preliminary inquiries, which may decide to close the matter or continue into further action in an adjudicatory proceeding. We also bring cases to suspend an individual where the Commission has discretion to exercise that suspension. We don't bring cases that require a mandatory suspension, for example. And we also bring requests to approve the disposition agreement or a suspension agreement that the Division of Standards may have negotiated. In other words, a case of a particular individual could come to the Commission more than once, in fact, often does. And unless of course, the Commission declines to open a preliminary inquiry, at which point there is only one time that case comes up. And so this number of 160 should not be construed as 160 different police officers that we discuss at executive sessions. Now, just to discuss a little sort of trend, recent trend. During 2023, we collectively issued 19 decisions and orders. That number climbed to 52 decisions and orders in 2024. And for 2025, as of November, that number was 64. We conducted a slightly higher number of hearings, but a similar number of pre-hearing conferences. I will note that any one individual adjudicatory case can have more than one pre-hearing conference, but typically only has one hearing, even though those hearings usually last several days. We received a lot of complaints on an ongoing basis and operate under the principle that every complaint gets a response, even if that is not always, of course, the response that the complainant is looking for. Our rate of interactions with the public and agencies regarding discipline continues to increase. We receive an average of 16 new complaints, 19 new reports every week. In other words, that's 16 new complaints plus 19 new reports. On top of that, we screen an average of 17 complaints a week because sometimes those have insufficient data, they're not within our mandate, or they're duplicate or have already been submitted. So in total, we handle about 52 cases or complaints on any given week on average. Sometimes, of course, more, sometimes a little bit less. Again, suffice to say that we're plenty busy with all of this information and data that comes to us. In that similar category, we responded to 313 public records requests. That's a comparison of 172 the prior year. That's an 86% increase, which was an increase of 100% the year before. We did multiple presentations on standards for agency certification at these commission meetings. We have done a number of different drafts and thinking about regulations and internal advisories. And we, of course, implemented new policies that merited new workflows and a lot of internal coordination to be able to effectuate those workflows, communicate with agencies, and implement that data up. One case in point is the relinquishment of certification, which was a policy that perhaps I will admit I did not anticipate. We would have as many requests as we are getting. So we might have to rethink a little bit whether we need to change or modify that policy in the coming months. I'll move on to say that what we are anticipated for next year, this year that is now upon us. We can expect to see an increase in the disciplinary cases. You can see that between the 2-year period in which we started bringing cases to the commission, in other words, that is November 2022 to November 2024, we closed 78 cases, while in 1 year, for the same period, that is November 2024 to November 2025, we closed 78 cases. We can see that we have currently a pipeline of 85 cases, and at the end of 2024, we have 77, which again is also a slight increase. What that picture doesn't tell us is that there's a number of cases that come in and others that come out, and that is only the pipeline or the funnel that continues. I will also note that given the volume of reports and activity that at the Division of Standards, we did hire recently 2 additional compliance agents, and thus expect that these numbers, in other words, the number of disciplinary cases that are brought to the Commission to discuss in executive session, will increase for the year of 2026. Finally, for 2026, we hope that to come back to the work done looking at the regulations associated to recertification that has been discussed before. Also something we've recently discussed, which is streamlining the process for submitting complaints and revising the regulations that we call the procedural rules, 555 CMR 1. We continue to ask for resources from the administration and the legislature to implement an audit program. And it is our expectation that we'll take steps to do that in this 2026. And we also are setting the stage for some internal audits in our finance department and our operations to do some self-audits of our operation. We're also projecting that an effort that has been underway to enhance our reporting will be deployed early this coming year. This is the business intelligence tool. The platform is Tableau. We've done a lot of work in this area, and again, expect to come in the early part of next year with new rollout of a lot more information that will be available for the public via our website, the capability to do a number of different queries with all of the information and that we put out there and more, which, by the way, my hope is that will minimize or decrease the number of public records requests that we respond to. We are also currently building the platform solution to receive and report on letters of commendation, and we'll continue to work with the work that Annelie has been leading in the area of agency certification. One of these efforts, for example, recently is the use of force and a use of force reporting, and we'll come back with detailed recommendations in the early part of the next year. We expect to do a lot more analysis and trending on the data that we collect to inform policy. And finally, we also plan on implementing a mentoring program to enhance the experience of our employees. Much of what I read and understand about having a hybrid environment, which we do, is that the opportunities for informally mentoring individuals must be more intentional, which is our intention to do. So later in the agenda, Eric will be presenting the financial picture, as I mentioned just a few minutes ago, and the budget request for administration and finance for the fiscal year 27. But it is fair to say that our budget is plateauing. It's not going to grow at the same rate as it did in the first years. And thus, our ability to hire and increase resources at a similar rate will also be understandably decreasing and plateauing. However, the work that continues and the work continues to increase, which means, in my view, that we will need to focus very intently on realizing efficiencies. And those efficiencies can come in three major ways, because we have an important interest in making sure that those efficiencies are realized. We will leverage work in a rational way via regulations and guidance. And by leverage, I mean leveraging through agencies, so that there's minimization of data entry, for example, and improvement in workflows and technologies, so that again we can realize those efficiencies. We will improve internal workflows. We'll continue developing and enhancing standard operating procedures with an eye towards additional templates, more coordination, and of course, a focus on communication, which is something that we take seriously, because agencies need to know how much we're changing from one month to the next. We will continue our commitment to the development of enhancements to our technology, and I happen to be a big proponent of leveraging in a prudent way some of the tools that are already being used with great promise, like artificial intelligence. I want to close my report with just a very brief human resource or HR update. We recently welcomed 2 new additions to the Division of Standards, 2 new compliance agents. That is Ed Roderick, who joined us after he retired from the FBI, having worked there for 25 years of distinguished service, and Mike Posanka, who started earlier this week. He joined us after 26 years in Homeland Security investigations. We are in the final stages of bringing a records access officer, and we'll need to backfill 1 attorney position, given that our own Everett Bowl went back to his prior agency in a capacity as their Deputy General Counsel. By the way, we wish Everett great luck in his new role. We will continue our efforts, as I mentioned, for hiring. And I will close by emphasizing that we currently have 51 employees in total. With that, let me make a pause here and stop sharing my screen and see if commissioners have a question or a comment.
I don't think I see any hands in the air, Enrique. I know I speak for my fellow commissioners in recognizing the extraordinary accomplishments of our now 51-person staff during this year, and also applauding your goals for the coming year.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, with the chair's permission, I'll turn to the second portion of my report that is noted in the agenda, and that is the notion of the advisory committee, if I'm not mistaken. I'll summarize a little bit for the benefit of Commissioner Baker, who wasn't in attendance at the time, and then others who may have not observed the discussion at the last commission meeting. And some recent documentation that we did receive on the topic of creating an advisory committee. Prior, at the last commission meeting, we were responding to a letter that we received from the MAS Chiefs, the MACOPA, Chiefs of Police Association. They're recommending, and I agree with the general idea of establishing an advisory committee to inform the Commission on matters of policy at early stages of the policy development process. At the time, we had not met with them. In their letter, they suggested a meeting. We did meet with them, and they submitted a second letter, a follow-up letter to that meeting. That second letter has been included in the packet. And in that letter, they further they put finer points to the recommendation about an advisory committee. Notably, they suggest that such advisory committee, include members of law enforcement in different ways. They are thinking of an advisory committee that is larger than what I was anticipating. I totaled the number of suggestions here, and they are thinking about a 19-member body. That would be at least 15 from my count coming from law enforcement, and that would be quite a diverse committee. So that letter has been included in the packet. I will also note that just last night, we did receive, let me back up a little bit. We also received a letter from MACLEA, the Mass Association of College Law Enforcement Agencies, in support of the notion of an advisory committee. That letter was included in the packet. They would be more than happy to participate if they were to be included, and like the idea of discussing matters of policy early on. And just last night, we received a letter from MACOPA, the union that represents 5,000 members of the rank and file here in Massachusetts. And let me summarize, because we were not able to include it in the packet that was distributed to commissioners. I want to just briefly summarize it. Given this, we are not proposing that the commission vote on this idea. And after my summary and any questions or thoughts, I would really love to get more input from commissioners about the general direction that we should be going, because collectively, the three different letters and discussions and perspectives could point in different ways as to whether it should be an advisory committee that is, on the larger side, I would say, about 19 or so people, or smaller, like I initially proposed, and MACOPA also is imagined. So it occurs to me that MASCOP also, observed the discussions from last meeting, from the last commission meeting, and because of the comments that they mentioned, they are in opposition to creating an advisory committee, but on the terms of the mass chiefs of police. But my view is that they are thinking about the first letter from the chiefs of police. They agree that having an experienced law enforcement voice available at the earliest stages of policy development would improve the efficiency and effectiveness of the commission and the policy development goal. So they are generally in favor of having law enforcement, of course, at the table. And they go on to write that we support the proposal of Commissioner Hania Bluestone, who spoke about this at the last commission meeting, to create an advisory committee composed jointly of chiefs and rank and file law enforcement officers. Let me just mention that they go on to say that this type of composition would resolve the concerns presented by the mass chiefs. They feel that experienced law enforcement voices will help the development of the commission policy while ensuring the perspectives of the rank and file and the different voices to be heard in the policy development process. I'll just summarize by saying that they are thinking of an 8-member body. They mention appointed by the governor but I don't think that would be necessary. I think the commission has all the discretion and authority to create one and meet all the objectives around this. And they do have the suggestion to include 2 chiefs, 3 rank and file members with different experience, 1 county sheriff, 1 former law enforcement officer, and at least somebody with a union, primarily of law enforcement officers. So it's fair to say that these 3 organizations are in support of the commission creating an advisory committee, but they have different ideas as to the composition and the size, which is fair, and it's something that the commission should consider when creating this. So, as I mentioned, given the receipt of this letter and these perspectives, we did not put this item on the agenda to be voted on, but would love to hear from commissioners if they have questions or concerns, and especially if they favor going in one direction of size, composition versus another. At the time of the last commission meeting, it was a threshold question whether to have an advisory committee or not. There was views on both sides. I think that threshold question is still a fair question. So any discussion we could have about that would be very helpful to the staff. And we expect to then, after some discussion, to come back with more detailed recommendations. Commissioner Hall has a question or a comment?
Yes, good morning. I just had a chance to read the letter that came this morning from the last group, I guess, that was in favor of Commissioner Bluestone's proposal. So, and I think this was said at the last meeting, but just in thinking about it, it's an advisory committee. I'm always going to be concerned about there being representation, and that would include civilian representation that these policies impact in having civilians there at the beginning also. So I think there's a level of expertise, of course, that police can bring, but it's the post-commission. And I think the appearance of having yet another advisory committee made up simply of law enforcement officers may send the wrong message to the public when we're already dealing with issues of trust. And I do want to remind us of not that we forgot, but why we are here to begin with. So I have that concern, and like I said, it will impact community. That the proposal by Commissioner Bluestone, I mean, again, along with, I think you said this, Enrique, I don't see a need for the governor to appoint anyone. In fact, I think that would be problematic for me. In particular, these are political appointments. We know it's all very political. This can get really political. And I think the issue we had with the chiefs only advisory committee is that it didn't include, there would be an issue of diversity in terms of race and sex and cultural background, et cetera. We know that. But also with this, I mean, how would we ensure it? And I would say if we were to move forward, which I'm not necessarily in favor of at this moment, it doesn't make sense to me right now in this form or any that have been proposed. But if we were, I would want to also kind of have some input on who that selection committee would be composed of, who would make up that selection committee, who would it be offered to? Would your traffic police officers be involved, those who do community policing? I saw a number of like detectives, still 2 chiefs. I don't know if there's enough union representation, et cetera. So even with that proposed 8-person, understanding why 8 people makes it a little easier for quorum may not be big enough to truly kind of represent as best we can. Of course, it can't get out of control, but the diversity of law enforcement in the Commonwealth.
Thank you. Commissioner, can I react perhaps just to a couple of points, if I may? In their second letter, the chiefs do recommend or recognize that the benefit of non-law enforcement, for lack of a better word, positions. They talk about juvenile issues specialist, among some of the positions that they take. Again, that will be entirely up to the commission. Also, and critically, on the actual persons to be appointed, it's one thing to say let's have that be a chief, but it's another to bring you a specific name or a specific sergeant, whatever. All of that would be presented to you, the commission, to approve it when it came down to it. In other words, we wouldn't want to just simply to say, okay, the creation of an advisory committee, and then let someone else, staff, myself, choose those individuals. They would come back to you so that you could, vote on them or not.
Thank you.
Commissioner Luma?
Thank you. I'm just curious more about kind of the meeting itself that was held. I'm wondering kind of why they don't, why those that are proposing don't think that the public hearings are sufficient enough in order to kind of give feedback on any policy proposal and the role of MPTC. I think that came up the last time. Do we need an additional forum to get feedback on policies when we have some that exist already? I'm just curious more about kind of what the answers to that was in the meeting that you held with them.
Yeah, so I think the chiefs allude to it briefly in their second letter, but I think there's great opportunity for buy-in by creating this kind of committee to discuss those whatever policies we want to implement, whatever standards are being discussed, the approaches, etc. And frankly, some efficiencies. It is you can imagine a scenario in which there's a lot of discussions, and there has been a lot of discussion, for example, between our legal team, Annie, the MPTC, etc., subject matter experts, a lot of research on a particular standard. And if we go down the path like we have been doing with presenting to the commission, presenting at MPTC, bringing back to the commission, etc., issuing regulations, and we go down all the way down to the public hearing on specific regulations, and get a lot of comments back that beg the question that are fundamental questions. It could be a lot of frankly not best use of time when you look at all of it together. So the general idea of buy-in and participation early on policy questions before there's a big write-down of regulations, I think has real merit. The question is, we are discussing here, well, who gets to do that, and how does that look, or how does that take place? Now, more specifically, in the meeting that we did have, it is very clear that there's not an intention, if I may say so, by anyone that I can see, to try to take any decision making away from the commission. That the way that we structure this advisory committee would be entirely advisory, non-binding. We could remove, and I think this is key, any one individual or sets of individuals who we see, are not interested in being constructive. That unfortunately could be a possibility, and address it that way so that we don't spend a lot of time trying to convince people of something that they will never want to be convinced, for example. But again, it's a general idea that policies that will affect everyone in law enforcement, there's great benefit of having those people tasked with implementing them, to have had the opportunity to participate and have their voices heard, for the simple reason of buying.
Commissioner Casarosian, please. Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you, Enrique.
Thank you. I'm glad to have the discussion because I guess I still feel that I'm very wary about having an advisory committee like this. I understand the reasoning behind it, but we have a commission of 9 commissioners. 3 of them are law enforcement from different areas in law enforcement. We work jointly with the MPTC. We listen to and consider advice from all stakeholders. We don't, limit anybody's ability or any stakeholders' ability to participate and to give input. This concerns me. I still don't see, I'm still not convinced that there's a need for this. I'm worried about how other stakeholders may react to this, but I'm not convinced. I'm a little concerned about it.
Thank you. Commissioner Baker?
Yes, good morning. I just want to chime in here. And I'm just going to go back to something that my fellow commissioner just said, the stakeholders. The men and women that are put out on the streets to enforce these policies or even to adhere to them, they're the stakeholders as well. I'll use myself as an example. I'm sitting on a commission. If I was on a medical commission or doing medical policy, I would want medical people advising on the best policies, best practices. I don't think that changes any makeup of this commission. We're still the voting parties. We still vote on these policies, but simply having some people that have experience to weigh in on a policy in its early infancy to give you the best practices. And I agree, it could be a wide, diverse range of people in the field, including civilians and professional staff. But I think just getting advice from people that do, I don't see what the harm in that is. And I would consider everybody as a stakeholder when it comes to this.
Thank you. Commissioner Bluestone?
Yeah, thank you. I think I just want to respond to Commissioner Hall and Commissioner Casarosian because, I would say that we are a civilian commission, and we've been created by design to represent different parts of the state, different individual categories of diversity, and also different professional interests. So I personally don't see the need for an advisory committee that represents these sort of different stakeholders. I do agree with the idea of an advisory commission that is comprised of chiefs as well as rank and file officers that represent different perspectives in an advisory role that could help us to think about how the policies that we're creating and to help us to consider at an earlier stage how the policies that we're generating may impact their departments in their day-to-day operations. And I have a strong preference for parsimony and avoiding unnecessary complexity. And I would point out that, us as commissioners, we do not at this stage direct the choice and the development of the policies. So we're not giving input at the very outset of how these policies are being developed, and they're sort of in process by the time we begin to review them. I do think having input at an earlier stage could be helpful to us and could also increase buy-in from law enforcement. And I do believe we should strive for more of a partnership. However, that being said, I also share your concern, Commissioner Hall, that, our commission was created due to failures and blind spots in the law enforcement culture that have allowed bias, discrimination, and corruption to go unchecked, and that we have ultimate responsibility to ensure that any advisory commission serves exclusively in an advisory role. So I would favor the suggestion that there be a representative from the commission that either chairs or serves on this advisory commission if it's created. And also, as I said before, I strongly recommend having a mental health, a behavioral health specialist, or a chaplain to serve on a commission like this that can help to sort of attend to the group dynamics of any such commission. And I would recommend personally that we keep it small.
Thank you. Commissioner Talley, I think your hand was up next.
Yes. So my colleagues have already spoken and have said a lot of what I was thinking. So that kind of gets me down to where, is this a nice to have or a need to have type situation?
I think that's a great question, Commissioner. I think it could be, in hindsight, if it goes well, which is my intention and expectation, it favors to be on the need side, but it's really not necessary. It's not in the legislature. It's in the legislation. In some cases, in my prior experience, these kinds of advisory committees sometimes are, written into law. And so that's not the case here. So it is not absolutely necessary. I think it comes in the nice to have plus, and if all goes well, it would be it would prove to have been a worthy endeavor. In my opinion, I think I favor the creation of an advisory committee, without question. Then after that, it becomes just, how and who, how big, who's at the table, and my job and that of the staff would be to make sure that it's productive and it's not a lot of time being spent unnecessarily discussing things without reaching conclusions and that kind of.
Thank you. Commissioner Calderon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First off, to all my fellow commissioners, I appreciate everybody weighing in. And for the most part, I think I agree with many of the sentiments and comments so far. But I'm going to dial it back 4.5, 5 years ago when I myself brought this forward, suggested of an advisory committee at the request of some of the external groups, Strategies for Children, the ACLU representatives, people that wanted to have a more advisory role and more input into what we're doing. In our commission, our body voted it down for many of the reasons that were already stated by some of my fellow commissioners, that if we were to form an advisory committee, it gives the impression that our commission is allowing some voices, but not all, to be heard at the same time. And the current practice that we have allows everyone to be heard at the same time. Sometimes I know issues, time is of the essence. I strongly feel that this is not one of them. What's most important is to get the decision right. When we're talking about how policing is going to police in the future, how it affects not only the people we serve, but the people we represent, the ones that are doing that job, it's of the utmost importance to take our time, hear every single opinion and voice, bring in the experts, allow them time to testify. I think the current practice is working very well. It is time consuming, but we do have a large group that are working on this. So I think taking the time to get it right is the most important thing that we can do. And I think the submission from testimony should be in writing, like we've been doing, whether it's a chief, an expert in the field, or a layperson and a civilian that has a comment or an experience about how they may have been treated, or a family member. If we take submissions in writing, we can always refer back to them, and everybody has the opportunity to be heard. So I don't think time is of the essence. I think we should take our time. Going a little bit further, I'd like to address both letters. I have not read the MACOPA letter entirety. I know it came in last night, so I'll take a look at that, as it is members that I believe that I'd be here at least commenting on. I did take the time to look at the chief's second proposal, and if my count is correct, I see 5 chiefs, and/or 4 and 1 and a commander, which is a chief, 3 union officials, couple of more labor groups, so maybe 5 if my math is right, and then a bunch of experts that seem to be, for the most part, in the policing world, which of course is important. But I'm extremely worried, as in my position as a commissioner, about every other voice throughout the Commonwealth. So I like the way the commission is going. I like these open meetings. This is the forum to have these conversations. And if we can have written testimony from all people, then we can bring it to the forefront and have this open, transparent conversation about what's best practices should be put forward to the MPTC, and talk about regulations and have it all out. I mean, after all, that is what one of the responsibilities of the 9-person commission. So I'm going to be against it for right now, and I'm going to side with what I believe most of what I've heard from my fellow commissioners, and most strongly because we've already told people no 4.5 years ago. However, I'll close with this. If there is a want or a need by my fellow commissioners to have a further discussion about this, I think maybe one of the things that I heard here is a major concern about how many chiefs, how many union officials, how many police officers, and discussion about, from one of the commissioners, about equal representation. The best way that I think that our 9-person commission can have the most input and be clear on representation is if we have a discussion on a body, an advisory committee, maybe that committee should be appointed by each commissioner. Maybe each commissioner should make the appointment. And it kind of takes out a question. We definitely won't have 9 union officials. We won't have 9 chiefs. But it gives the opportunity for many different voices to be heard. I just offer that out there to keep an open door if my fellow commissioners want to entertain this. But I feel the way I do.
Thank you. I'm just mindful of the time. We've got an enormous amount of information to cover. I'm going to turn to Commissioner Crispin, who has not had any opportunity to speak as to this issue. And I think we have a general consensus among the commissioners of their views at this moment in time. But let me hear, if I could, from Commissioner Crispin, please.
Yes, good morning. I'll keep my comments short. There's been a lot of very good ideas brought up, but I will say, despite the fact that we represent different interests, backgrounds, and perspectives, I think there are more opinions than just ours. So to the extent that we could create a subcommittee, I'm all for it. I think the concern for me is always who those committee members going to be, and how we appoint them.
Thank you. Commissioner Bluestone, did you want to add anything that you have not yet stated?
If you don't mind, I just want to weigh in very quickly on one issue. I just want to point out that the vote that we took 4.5 years ago, we were at a very different stage as a commission, and the proposal at that time for an advisory committee was a very different type of proposal. It was involving a more broad group of stakeholders. And we voted it down at that time because we believed that we were representative and could consult with those different groups. And this is a very practical advisory committee to help us understand how the policies that we develop might impact departments in real time. And I don't think that it impedes the process that we already have to hear all voices.
Okay, if I can just add a comment and then I'll turn to you, Enrique. I've listened with great interest to the views of my fellow commissioners on this. I think what I want to say at this point is that this commission, in its almost 5 years of existence, has reached out to the public in so many different ways, and I applaud that reaching out. I think we have in every single aspect of our work. We have done our best to involve the members of the community who are impacted by the work that we do. And I think we will always continue to do that. So I think I am at the moment of the view, and I like Commissioner Talley's blunt, nicer need comments. I do not see a need at the present time. Enrique, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, is the commission comfortable with first having a lower threshold question answered now or at a future with this discussion? The threshold being advisory committee at all, having one or not, because I detect both. Those that want it, it's a matter of how it's going to be, or are open to that idea. It's a matter of how many, from where, who gets to appoint them, etc. Would it be helpful to try to answer that threshold question now, or is the commission not ready to take that discussion?
Again, my concern is the amount of time that this is addressing, given everything else that we are going to take up today, Enrique. But if your question is a preliminary view, you want each commissioner to indicate. I just don't. I think we've done that because people have responded with different perspectives at this moment in time, and to some degree, their answer has to do with the other issues that have been raised in our comments. So I am. I'd like simply at this point, unless there's any commissioner who has not had an opportunity to comment, I think I'd like to just let us reflect on it further. We're not going to take and then move on to the next item on the agenda. Any commissioner oppose that approach? So, and I don't want to be the heavy here, but I think with that, Enrique, perhaps we can move on at this point.
Yes,
Again, thanking everybody.
That's fine. Thank you everybody for your comments. I think next on that, my portion of the report is the relinquishment of certification from one individual. Heather Hall is going to take that.
Yes, thank you. And good morning, Madam Chair and Commissioners. We have an application for relinquishment for you all to consider this morning from Mr. Stephen Gondella. And in accordance with the Commission's policy on voluntary relinquishment, the Commission staff evaluated Mr. Gondella's application and conducted the requisite background check. Just by way of background, Mr. Gondella's law enforcement background began when he was serving as a member of the Massachusetts State Police, or MSP, in 1999. He was automatically certified as a law enforcement officer as of July 1, 2021. And then the Commission recertified him for a period of 3 years in 2002, and again in the July of 2025. He subsequently retired in good standing as a lieutenant from the MSP effective this August. His certification is currently set to expire on November 1st of 2028. Mr. Gondella is seeking to relinquish his certification because he wishes to obtain a private investigator's license. And consistent with the Commission's policy, the Certification Division reviewed the application and internal records, and at that time did not see any areas of concern, then forwarded that application over to the Standards Division. They also reviewed the application and conducted their normal due diligence. which included a review of the federal and Massachusetts court records. And after that review, the Standards Division raised some concerns about Mr. Gondella's negative response to the question that relates to whether he had been involved in any civil or administrative agency actions related to law enforcement. And he did answer that question in the negative, but he was involved in a lawsuit. It was a 2007 federal lawsuit titled Farrar v. Gondella. So the Standards Division also reported that the jury considered the evidence in that matter. It did go to trial, and that they did find in favor of Mr. Gondella. So with that, the certification division followed up with him and conveyed that during the review, the commission learned of the lawsuit and asked him to supplement. And there were some communications with Mr. Gondella after that, and ultimately he did submit a timely application with regard to that particular lawsuit, and he supplemented. So just a really quick note, in an abundance of caution, I just want to note for the commission that this litigation was actually active while I worked in the MSP's legal unit. I do not remember the litigation, and it does not impact the executive director's recommendation before you today, but I did want to note it nonetheless. So in addition to the review that staff conducted, pursuant to the relinquishment policy, Mr. Gondella's application and his supplemental application have been posted on the commission's website through the announcement regarding today's meeting. And I did check in with Jamie this morning, and it looks like we do not have any public comments with respect to this application. And so with all of that, just with respect to the executive director's recommendation, we're recommending that the commission grant Mr. Gondella's application with the condition that going forward, if he seeks to return to working in law enforcement in Massachusetts in any capacity, including details, that he must disclose that he was a named defendant in this 2007 federal lawsuit, and that he must also disclose any other information that is responsive to the questions on the application for certification. And just a note that if the commission does decide to issue a granting with a condition, then there would be a outreach to Mr. Gondella with respect to that 14-day requirement that's stated in the policy. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions that you all might have.
I don't think I see any hands in the air. So I think with that, I'll just take a vote on the recommendation. The recommendation with that condition. Commissioner Baker?
Yes.
Commissioner Bluestone?
Yes.
Commissioner Calderon?
Yes.
Commissioner Crispin?
Yes.
Commissioner Hall?
Yes.
Commissioner Kazarosian?
Yes.
Commissioner Luma?
Yes.
Commissioner Talley?
Yes.
And I'm also a yes, so that's unanimously carried. Thank you very much, Heather, for that presentation.
Sure.
And I think we move on now to the finance update. Eric, please.
Is Eric on board? I don't see Eric.
Sorry about that. I am here.
Oh, okay.
I was just saying I'm going to share my screen. I didn't realize I was still on mute. Sorry about that. Okay, very good. I'm assuming everyone can see the screen in front of them?
Yes.
Okay, excellent, very good. All right, good morning, everyone. As you're aware, a memo was distributed to you last week discussing the Commission's FY27 budget submission to A&F. While Post is an independent agency, an official submission must still be made to A&F, as it is the governor who kicks off the budget season in January with the filing of her budget, which will be House 2. The memo was provided in advance of this meeting in order to prepare you for an ultimate vote on the numbers. This table that you see here displays our budget numbers for each spending category with the subsequent totals. We did something a little bit different with this submission. Rather than submit our usual evolving budget, Post turned to a more traditional two-stage process where we present maintenance growth and what's known as cuts and expansions, or C&E. We did it this way to give A&F some options, and that way we're basically showing them that we recognize the challenging situation that they're in with all of this fiscal uncertainty. The maintenance growth is the amount required to maintain existing level of services, and then the cuts and expansions, or C&E, is the instance where an agency offers programmatic expansions and hopefully tries to give you some proportional offsets as well. The build up to FY27 starts with the current year's spending plan, which you see there in the green column. The next column shows you how much we would need to continue the existing level of services, and that is where you see FY27 maintenance. And then the third column over displays our so-called expansions with a very slight offset that you see there. And then, of course, the final column shows the total FY27 request, which would be 9.59 million, which represents about 8.6% over the current fiscal year. What exactly does this alternative submission of maintenance and cuts and expansions do? Again, it gives A&F some options contingent upon the fiscal climate. They can simply give us maintenance growth, the full request. They also could level fund us, or they could even reduce us from our current appropriation. We just don't know at this time, but we are working with them closely to determine the final outcome, which would be revealed sometime in January. Our budget, as you know, is predominantly employees or payroll. Notwithstanding the 9 commissioners and 6 provisioned hearing officers, you will recall the commission originally expected to have onboarded a total of 60 positions by June 30th. We are currently, as Enrique said, at 51. Now, in September, we had to purposefully delay onboarding most positions to ensure that we could make payroll. That's one reason why we're nowhere near the 60 figure right now. And now we've gone even a step further by refraining from filling any more positions until we know exactly what our appropriation is going to be the next year. So therefore, we're telling A&F that we can continue with our current existing level of services with 55 employees, and that's the $317,000 increase that you see there, right there. And then that's basically the annualization of the 55 employees. Now, should things suddenly take a turn to be a little bit brighter, perhaps, so with some of the forecasts that are coming out, A&F could opt to give us the additional $425,000, which would restore 4 positions. You've probably noticed too that in both of these scenarios, which totals 59 employees as opposed to 60, that's because we decided not to backfill one recently vacated position. So rather than 60, it'll be 59. And as you can see also in both scenarios, they do not include a COLA, and there is more details about that in the memo that was included in your packets last week. The Commission's technical needs are stabilizing as it slowly nears full operational status, and nothing confirms this tenet more clearly than the chart that's before you now. All of our IT spending is categorized as maintenance, meaning we are simply maintaining everything that's already been developed, for example, licensing, storage, etc. Hence the level funding for FY27. So more detail, again, is contained in the fiscal memo. This is the org chart that we're forecasting for FY27. It basically is a visual of what has already been discussed in the memo, and it's intended to just present to you a clearer picture. The positions that you see there in, oops, there we go. The position, sorry about that. That's better. The positions that you see there in the black, that is where we are currently. That's the 51 filled positions. And then the orange and green boxes a little bit below, the orange ones are basically open positions that are being held until we have a better idea of next year's budget. And this level would also represent if we were to receive only maintenance funding. And then finally, the red boxes down here display the additional 4 positions we expected to fill in FY26, but again have decided to offer up as optional to A&F depending on the future fiscal climate. And then finally, I just wanted to close with providing you an update, as it has been 6 months since we last reported on the Commission's diversity metrics. As you can see, we compared post metrics to the makeup of the state's population and the over 46,000 state employees. A detailed memo was also included in your packets, and we will continue to regularly review these statistics and, of course, report back to you. And Madam Chair, if it's okay with you, I can take any questions that the commissioners may have.
Commissioner Calderon?
Thank you, Madam Chair. More of a comment. Eric, thank you very much. Very thorough. It's one of the things we continually get asked when I'm meeting with our groups statewide. So I want to say great job. Thank you much. Enjoy your holiday.
Thank you. Thank you very much. You're welcome.
Commissioner Luma, please.
Yes, thank you so much for your presentation, Eric. It's been a pleasure working with you around this. We have some very important goals for the commission, and it requires a certain amount of funding. And I know that you've worked diligently with the rest of the team to determine where our priorities are. I'm hoping that we get what we request, but we know that it's tough times right now. But I just wanted to say thank you for your efforts, thank you for your diligence, and thank you for your thoughtfulness, along with just collaboration with the rest of the team to determine where we should be prioritizing.
Thank you,
And
Commissioner.
thank you, Commissioner Luma, for your function as our treasurer. We greatly appreciate that as well. And Eric, could you pull down the screen so that we can see all the commissioners?
Yes, of course. There we go.
It does.
Chair, I believe we need are we moving to accept this FY27 budget today? Is that?
That would be great. Yes, if you
Okay,
could.
so I'd like to propose that we accept as presented the FY27 budget.
Thank you. Is there a second to that motion?
Second.
Thank you. Commissioner Baker?
Yes.
Mr. Bluestone?
Yes.
Mr. Calderon?
Yes.
Mr. Crispin?
Yes.
Mr. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. Kazarosian?
Yes.
Commissioner Luma?
Yes.
Yeah, you're the prime mover. Thank you. Commissioner Talley?
Yes.
And I'm also a yes, so that's unanimously carried. Many thanks, Eric, for your presentation. Moving on now to the legal update. Randy, please.
Thank you. I will turn the floor over to Counsel Jerry Cahill, who is first going to talk about the guidance for constables that he has been working on with people inside and outside of our agency, and that he has spoken about previously. Jerry?
Great. Thank you, Randy, and good morning, commissioners. As you'll remember, you previously received a draft guide and a draft one-page do's and don'ts document, which discussed which actions are permissible and impermissible for uncertified constables to perform under the post-commission statutes and regulations. A draft of both the guide and one-page document were presented to you during the October commission meeting. Now, after that meeting, we received some comments and feedback on the guide and one-page do's and don'ts. And based on those comments and feedback, we made some revisions to both documents. Now, just for clarity's sake, I'll refer in this presentation to those two documents collectively as either the documents or the guides. Now, we provided to you the new and updated documents for your consideration. And if you think it appropriate, we'll be asking you at the end of this presentation to vote on whether to issue these documents in the name of the commission as guidance to constables here in the Commonwealth. Now, most of the comments that we received on these documents came from the heads of two constables associations, namely the Massachusetts Constable Association and the Massachusetts Bay Constable Association. Members of our office met with the heads of those two associations for over 2 hours, and they shared with us their thoughts about the guides. They also gave us some documentation, and to the extent that those documents related to revising the guides, we included those documents in your packet. For most comments, they provided to us orally or through brief notes, which they then explained to us orally. So I'll do my best to share with you the main points and recommendations that they made to us so that you can consider them as you make your decisions regarding the guides that we presented for your consideration at today's hearing. We also wish to acknowledge the help of members of the General Counsel's Office of the Massachusetts Trial Court who carefully reviewed the documents before you and provided very helpful feedback and recommendations. We worked in coordination with them while revising the documents before you today. Please allow me to start with capious warrants. As a reminder, a capious warrant is a court order that authorizes the arrest of a person for the purpose of ensuring their appearance in court. And in certain examples, the guide had described a constable serving a capious warrant on a person, which suggested that the constable was handing the capious warrant paperwork to that person. Well, the heads of the two constable associations, when we met with them, said that constables do not hand such paperwork to people. A constable keeps that paperwork in their possession. We talked as well with legal counsel at the Massachusetts Trial Court, who provided important insights into the service of notices and capious warrants. And so based on the feedback that we received, we've edited the guide, and we thank the heads of the constable associations for bringing this point to our attention. And we thank them again, as well as the General Counsel's Office of the Massachusetts Trial Court for their thoughts and perspectives on how to improve this portion of the constable guides. Now, the head of the two constable associations also said that they would like the guides to provide guidance to sheriffs and deputy sheriffs. And partly because the standards and analyses are different when a constable falls within the definition of a law enforcement officer and when a sheriff or deputy sheriff does, matters related to sheriff's office personnel are going to be addressed separately. Now, the heads of the two constable associations said that constables would not offer a person a ride to court and recommended that we cut examples from the guide, which suggests that constable might actually give someone a ride. We thought that that was a fair point, and we were grateful for their real world perspectives on these examples. We left those examples in the guide for now, though, because we thought that they might be helpful in the exceptional case where a constable did think to offer someone a ride. That's to say, we saw no harm in including the examples and a possible benefit. The heads of the two constable associations also recommended adding language to the one-page do's and don'ts for constables, which would say that constables were not able to do certain things unless they are certified. That issue, we believe, is already addressed in another part of that same one-page do's and don'ts document, which explains that the do's and don'ts assumes that the documents in question are not certified. More specifically, the do's and don'ts document states, and this is a quotation from the document, in this document, we will assume that the constables in question are acting in their capacity as constables and are not certified by the Post Commission. So this document only applies to constables who are not certified by the Commission. It explicitly does not apply to those who are certified. The heads of the two constables association also encouraged us to apply the principle of maliter manus imposuit, or the gentle laying on of hands, as they called it, to some of the examples in the guides. Now, maliter manus imposuit does not, though, appear to be an active legal principle in Massachusetts. In our research of the law on this point, we could find only 3 Massachusetts cases that use the phrase. 2 are from 1849, and the third from 2005 says that in prior times, perhaps her attorney would have entered the defense of maliter manus imposuit. So it seems that the concept mainly had been a defense for when a defendant used force to remove, say, a trespasser from the defendant's property. But as mentioned before, the principle does not seem to be an active one in Massachusetts law right now. The closest law that we currently have to maliter manus imposuit seems to be a certain legal defense that only applies to an occupant of a dwelling, not to a constable seeking to remove an occupant of a dwelling. So in the end, we did not think that it would be correct or proper to include this concept into the guides. Now, the heads of the two constable associations also recommended removing from the guide any suggestion that a constable's display of a badge, uniform, or firearm might be a factor in determining whether a person is placed under arrest. But the current law indicates that such displays are factors used by courts in determining whether a person is placed under arrest, and they also are factors to be considered under the definition of arrest currently in the Commission's regulations. As you know, the regulation that contains that definition is 555 CMR 9.02. Now, the heads of the two constable associations seem to want the guide to be changed because they disliked or disagreed with the definition of arrest found in the current regulations. In fact, they handed to us a memorandum on that very issue, which at their request has been provided to you in your packets. But the guidance we are presenting for your consideration is, as it must be, based on the law that is currently in effect. The guide is not meant to be a guidance for how constables should act based on laws that someday in the future might be enacted. It's a guide for how constables should act based on the laws that are in effect now. We thank the heads of the two Constables Association for sharing their thoughts and perspectives on this matter, but we do think that the guide appropriately provides guidance to constables based on the currently existing law. So we've left unchanged the passages which discuss the display of badges, uniforms, and firearms as factors that might help to determine whether an arrest has been executed. The heads of the two constable associations also expressed their frustrations with police officers who did not assist constables during evictions when a tenant refuses to leave or when a tenant is acting in a threatening way. Now, for context, the heads of these associations said that no police officers need to be called in the vast majority of situations, and that's consistent with what we've heard from others as well. But when the police are called, the heads of these two associations said that sometimes the police helped the constables and sometimes they did not. It depended on the officer's attitude and willingness to help. That's what they said. Although they were not able to say about how often the police were helpful or unhelpful when they're called, they did share with us videos and affidavits describing instances when police officers did not help constables during an eviction in the way the constables thought that the police officers should have helped them. The heads of the two constable associations said that it was not practical to call police as the guide recommended a constable might do, because a constable could not be guaranteed that the police would help them. We want to thank them for raising this as an issue. Although the vast majority of cases do not seem to need the assistance of police officers, this is an issue for some of the more difficult cases. We see the guides as a way to provide guidance to constables for sure, but also to provide guidance for police officers and what they might do in coordination with constables when the situation is right and proper for them to help. That's to say, we hope and expect the guide to be of some help to both constables and police officers in the future. We also want to emphasize two additional things. First, even if people have not always been satisfied with past experience, it's still safest and wisest for them to call the police in appropriate situations. And second, it is important to remember what the goal here is in writing the guide. It is not to fix every difficulty or to solve every problem that might arise during an eviction. No guide could ever do that. Instead, the guide is meant to communicate as well and as clearly as we can what the law is, so that people, and especially constables, who are earnestly interested in following the law might be given some guidance and clarity. We think and we hope that the guide accomplishes that goal, and we are grateful for the feedback and recommendations that we received from the head of the Massachusetts Constable Association, from the head of the Massachusetts Bay Constables Association, from the Trial Court General Counsel's Office, and from everyone else who helped to make and improve the guides. In summary, for the reasons I've discussed, we've made certain changes to the guides and have declined to make others. And with the chair's permission, we'd welcome any comments from the members of the commission. Thank you.
Thank you for that very thorough explanation and presentation, Jerry. Any questions or comments before we take a vote from the?
Thank you for that presentation. I know we've had a couple of conversations here in Worcester around issues concerning constables. So I just want, Enrique, if you can help me too, for clarifications. Are constables, are they certified or not? Because I heard, Gerald, you said those who are certified, are they required to be certified? And secondly, in the guidance, they are able to use a reasonable amount of force if they're being attacked or accosted. Who determines, is it our definition of reasonable use of force that we use with certified law enforcement, or is that different? Because that's where it gets a little vague for me and I'm not clear. Can you help me?
Yeah, no, thank you for both those questions. Yeah, to answer the second question first, the reasonable amount of force is just the standard principle of self-defense that's found in the Commonwealth. So it's not something specific to the commission. It's the principles of self-defense that are just found in general. And as to the first question that you asked, so the regulations and statutes that we have in effect say that constables fall within the definition of law enforcement officer. They execute an arrest, and basically they cannot execute an arrest or effectuate an arrest without being certified. So you don't have to be certified to be a constable as a general principle, but if you do certain actions, and that's what the guide speaks to, then you do have to be certified. So that's what we're trying to clarify through the guides. Thank you for the questions, Commissioner Hall.
Enrique, please.
And I will only add that there's no constable currently certified. Commissioner Hall.
Thank you. Commissioner Baker.
Yeah, I think I'm sure some of this was covered while I was away for a few months. I just have so you're asking us to weigh on, you basically said there's no constable that's certified, but you're asking the post commission to weigh on the guidelines. I'm a little bit lost here.
Jerry,
So
you want to take that?
if these constables are not certified, and you're using terms for police officers, but then you revert it back to saying self-defense, which self-defense is, yeah, it's good for any person on the street. Absolutely, you're allowed to defend yourself, but then you use a term that's in the policing world, and then we close with not one constable is certified. So I'm trying to find what are you looking for from the commission on this if they're not certified?
And is that a question for me or for Enrique?
I'll go with it. I'll go with anybody.
Okay.
And like I said, I've been away for quite some time. I'm just trying to get brought up to speed here because I'm honestly I'm at a loss.
Yeah. Let me take that, Jerry, if I may, and
Yes,
you can chime in. So it actually, the guidance is necessary because of that dilemma, because of that very issue, that there's no constable certified, and they're out there doing things that in some cases it's getting very close to an arrest for which they would need to be certified. Therefore, this guidance is you can continue to do all these things if you're not certified, because when you start acting like a police officer, in other words, in their case, executing an arrest, then they would be both in violation of the statute and coming into the definition of a law enforcement officer. The statute says specifically says the people that are within the scope of the post commission are, quote, constables executing an arrest for any reason, unquote. And so the moment that they are executing an arrest, they come within the definition of law enforcement officer. And when they're not certified, they're also in violation of it.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments from the commissioners? And Jerry, you are anticipating we take a vote, are you?
Yes, yeah. If there's no further questions, with your permission, Chair Hinkle, we would present the two guides to the commission. That's to say, the practical guidance for the Massachusetts constables and the one-page do's and don'ts for constables. And we present those two guides to the commission and ask that the commission vote to issue these documents in the name of the commission as guidance to constables here in Massachusetts. Oh, yeah.
Commissioner Calderon, please.
I'm sorry, Madam Chair, because now I'm stuck on it. I see my fellow Commissioner Chris, also a police officer, fire his hand up. The chief raises a sticks in my head that I wasn't getting. We're being asked to give guidance to somebody that we don't cover until they make an arrest, because the statute says when they make an arrest, they fall under the purview. This sounds like it's a legislative fix that needs to be filed, not a commission weigh-in. Am I misunderstanding that interpretation?
Well, let me mention, if I may, there's been efforts to correct this by legislative action. That has gone nowhere. The future of that is uncertain. There was this one effort that I think was filed that, in my humble opinion, did not really address the fundamental issue. But I think this is an effort to give, as Jerry said, not just constables practical guidance, but also officers who sometimes respond to those situations where constables may be involved as to what that acceptable behavior or not is.
And I see the general counsel going to weigh in too. I just want to make sure that I vote the right way. So we're giving guidance. I appreciate it.
Right.
Executive, all right, trying to be official. I appreciate that. Thanks.
And Eddie, if I may, Commissioner Crispin, if I could turn to our general counsel, and then I'll turn to you, please.
I'll just add one thing in case it may be helpful. One way of looking at this is that we're giving guidance to people about how they will cross over the line and become within our jurisdiction and need to be certified. So it's the guidance to people about when that would happen.
Thank you. I got it. Appreciate it, gentlemen.
And Commissioner Crispin, please.
Yes, my concerns were the same as Commissioner Calderon's in that this is a field that's highly unregulated. As someone who previously worked as a constable, there's no training. You fill the paperwork, you get the signatures, and you get sworn in. I have some concerns about the possible actions, possible repercussions of them engaging in some of the work they do that inevitably comes up with some confrontation. I've been in situations where I assisted constables and we took guns off of people. So I do have some concerns, and I think to the extent that we can maybe send a letter to the legislature. This is one of those fields that probably historically didn't draw the kind of attention that it potentially draws now. And I think by giving guidance, I think it's useful, but it also, to some extent, I feel kind of gives it some force of law. And I think we need to probably push the legislature to address this as opposed to just providing just the guidance.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments from the commissioner? If not, then let me take a vote on approving this guidance. Commissioner Baker?
Say no on what my fellow commissioner just said. I think we're stepping into something that should be back in the legislature. So I'm a no.
Thank you. Commissioner Bluestone?
Yes.
Commissioner Calderon?
No.
Commissioner Crispin?
I'm going to abstain for now.
Commissioner Hall?
I'm going to say no.
Commissioner Kazarosian?
Yes.
Commissioner Luma?
Yes.
Commissioner Talley?
No.
And I'm a yes. Who's been doing the arithmetic here?
I think we have a tie. We have 4 votes in favor, 4 votes against, and 1 abstention.
Randy, what happens in that situation?
I believe that a tie is not a passage,
Right.
So that it would fail. Now, if the abstaining commissioner were to change his vote, that might change the result.
Yeah, if I were inclined to vote, I'd say no for the time being. I think we need to do a better job instead of just providing guidance. Not we individually as a body, but I think we as a government we're not a government. The government legislature needs to do something about this, not just us providing guidance.
Commissioner Luma?
Yeah, my understanding, I know we just voted, but my understanding is the intention of this document is to let people know, should they, what if they take certain actions, they will fall under our oversight and purview. And so without the guidance, I feel like we're just perpetuating the I don't know what the right word is, but we're not moving the needle forward by not providing the guidance. I think we're just letting people just do what they want to do. At least we're providing some structure. This is not something that's going to be resolved today or tomorrow. I think it's going to take years. And I don't know how we can move forward without even providing the people some guidance to make a determination of whether or not they will fall under our purview. I don't know if I'm making sense, but I feel like this is needed to at least begin to set some structure, or else we're going to wait on the legislature, and there will be people based on their actions who will fall under our purview at some point, I believe. So that's just me.
Thank you. Commissioner Kazarosian.
Yes, thanks. I'm sort of hearing from that some of the no votes are that we should be doing more or be pushing the legislature, but I'm not sure I understand why that means we can't, as Commissioner Loomis said, at least provide some guidance and some structure, because this has been a point of a lot of confusion for everybody, not just, law enforcement, for constables, so I guess I would continue to urge that we reconsider this and at least take the step we can take right now, because I'm not sure we have any other steps we can take right now other than to continue to ask for legislative change or modification or clarification, which is not something that happens quickly. And in the meantime, people are in a state of confusion, and I think it's important that we do provide this guidance. It's not a cure-all, but it's absolutely a first step and a next step that I think is important, and as Commissioner Luber had pointed out.
And if I could just add, as Jerry Cahill pointed out when he explained this, the extent to which there has been interaction with so many applicable individuals and entities, I think just also provides some force beyond some force for the wisdom of providing guidance. We've worked with guidance during the years that we've been a commission, and it just seems to me that what we are doing here is providing guidance as to something that has been an issue that we've addressed at various times during the course of at least the last year. I'm not sure whose hand was next, and I don't mean to interrupt the process of discussion. Commissioner Calderon?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to explain myself for a minute as I asked questions, both that was answered by the Executive Director and then General Counsel too. As you could see, for police officers, here myself, we're kind of wishy-washy, thinking, okay, this is definitely a legislative fix, which we all know. And I agree with the sharing from Commissioner Crispin. At least here in Boston, I know personally myself, I have done the same. I'm out there and I have assisted constables in the ways of their operation, and without any real teeth to sink into. If we don't have the authority, then they don't have to listen to us. And if we're just issuing guidance, unfortunately, in the real world out on the street, many people aren't taking that guidance into consideration, and that could get a police officer hurt. So I think the way to go, and the reason that I went along with the no's, is I think a strong letter from the commission, from the body to the legislature, particularly the chairman or woman that wherever that bill sits, is to let them know that, hey, in order for the commission to actually have some teeth and do their job, they need to make the fix. And I think if we just give a blanket yes to a guidance letter that more often than not probably won't be followed, that's a recipe for disaster, and especially for the men and women that are there to assist them or called in after the fact that something happened. So I just felt that, even though I know the vote is over, and if I'm correct and Commissioner Crispin voted no, then it's well, it was a no anyway. But anyway, I felt that I should explain myself. So I appreciate the time, Madam Chair.
Enrique, please. Thank you, Larry.
I was just going to mention that these guidance, the necessity for these guidance arose out of what's already happening, especially in Worcester, of behavior that is very close to the line, if not over the line, of having to come to be certified. And which is why we felt it was necessary to issue this guidance. And perhaps lost in the shuffle was how much discussions we had with the trial court, because this clearly affects the trial court. If the legislature was to say that all constables have to be certified, period, whether they're executing an arrest or not, that would be a significant impact to the trial court, to the point of probably not being able to execute their orders. And so these attempts to be, reconciling those interests by issuing guidance that, okay, continue to do what you need, serving process, but when you start behaving like a police officer, constable, like the legislature says, when you're executing an arrest, then you need to be certified. And because you're not, you cannot do that. Therefore, the do's and don'ts, which, again, we would have to communicate. We have been communicating with, as you can see, with constables, with their associations. This was really an effort to try to, to resolve the issue that is already happening, which is in reports that get to us, somebody who is evicted or being foreclosed on, a constable who's not certified, using authority that they don't have.
Thank you, Enrique. Commissioner Crispin?
Yeah, so I just want to say, I want to change my vote just based on the reasoning given by Commissioner Luma and Cahill. I do think this is an area of great clarity, right? And I just hope that us issuing this guidance does not delay the legislature doing something on this. So I will change my vote to a yes on issuing the guidance.
Thank you. And with that, any further? So I think with that, the guidance would be approved, correct, Randy?
Yes, then it would be 5-4.
Commissioner Hall?
Yeah, just real quick. I know, Enrique, and I appreciate all of the work that has gone into this. It was because of some conversations we had in Worcester around the constables. My no was really, I do think we need to, and we have talked to lawmakers about it, that we really need to address the foundation, and hopefully, I just don't know that clarity for constables will be helpful, just the do's and don'ts. But I want to thank the commission for the work, our Enrique and his staff for the work they've done around this.
All right. Thank you. I think with that, fulsome discussion. We move on next to the request to remove complaint 6616 from the public database under 555 CMR 8.06 4B12.
And that also will be addressed by Attorney Jerry Cahill.
Thank you. Jerry, please.
All right. Thank you again, Randy, and thank you, Chair Hinkle. Good morning again. I've been asked to assist the executive director in a matter involving a petition to remove information from the commission's public database. For members of the public who might not be familiar with the commission's procedures and regulations, please allow me to give the following background information. The commission has a public database which displays information about certain complaints and discipline involving law enforcement officers, and our agency sometimes receives petitions from officers asking the commission to remove information displayed in that database. The regulations provide examples of certain types of information that the commission will not display in its public database. For example, information concerning an officer's personal finances or an officer's medical conditions. If we were to receive a petition about such information that is posted in our public database, we would, of course, swiftly remove it because, among other things, those types of information fall into categories that our regulations clearly state should not be posted in our database. But what happens if an officer seeks removal of information that does not fall into one of the specific categories of information that the regulations say should not be available to the public? Well, when it promulgated its regulations, the commission foresaw that such a situation might arise. So it created 555 CMR 806 4B12, which allows the commission to make information about a complaint or disciplinary matter unavailable to the public if the commission votes to make that information unavailable. so the commission can vote to make certain information unavailable even when that information does not fall squarely into the categories of information that the regulations say must be made unavailable to the public. And that brings us to the matter before you today. An officer filed a petition to remove information from the database, but that information does not fall squarely within one of the regulations specifically saying that the information must be withheld from the public. The executive director has carefully reviewed the petition and the materials related to the petition, and based on his review, is recommending that the commission exercise its authority under 555 CMR 806 4B12 for one of the complaints in this matter, and to make the information for that one complaint, complaint 6616, unavailable to the public. Now, let me give you some background information about this case that might help provide some helpful context. Amy Hall was a police officer employed by the Brookline Police Department, and over a period of years, her police department filed 4 complaints against her, which are currently described in the Commission's public database. Under 555 CMR 808, Officer Hall has filed with the executive director a petition to remove the information concerning each of those 4 complaints. She wants the information for all 4 of those complaints off the database. Now, 3 of these complaints do not seem to present any new or uncommon legal issues, so it seems that those 3 complaints might be handled through the usual process outlined in 555 CMR 808 for the review of such petitions by the executive director. As you know, that is how these petitions are typically resolved. But the 4th complaint in Officer Hall's petition touches on issues that are new to our agency and potentially significant. It's information about this 4th complaint that the executive director recommends that you vote to make unavailable to the public. That 4th complaint, complaint 6616, arises from 2 separate instances, each one involving Officer Hall trying to stop the promotion of another officer in her police department named Cheryl Malloy. The first of those 2 instances occurred when Officer Malloy was applying for a position to become a sergeant in the Brookline Police Department, and Officer Hall wrote to the Brookline Select Board strongly encouraging them not to promote Officer Malloy to become a sergeant. Now, in one of Officer Hall's messages to the Select Board, she wrote that Officer Malloy had lied in the materials that she submitted when she had applied for the position of sergeant, and wrote that this alleged lie was a purposeful attempt to defraud civil service and the town of Brookline. An investigation was conducted, and it seems that Officer Malloy most likely did not lie in her application materials. But the evidence also suggests, for a number of reasons, that Officer Hall seems honestly to have believed that Officer Malloy did lie in her application materials. The Brookline Police Department disciplined Officer Hall then, in part, for communicating to a relevant public agency what seems to have been her honestly held beliefs on a matter of public importance. Now, I'll put that matter aside for just one moment, because the discipline issued by the Brookline Police Department relied not just on that statement made by Officer Hall, but also on other statements that Officer Hall made a little later on. I'll talk now about those other statements. Officer Malloy was in fact promoted to become a sergeant in the Brookline Police Department. She had not yet completed a year in that position when she applied for another position to become a lieutenant in the police department. Again, Officer Hall tried to stop her promotion. This time she wrote a letter to the Brookline Human Resources Department, and she said Officer Malloy had not yet been a sergeant for a year, so Officer Malloy was not permitted to take the promotional exam to become a lieutenant. In fact, the Brookline Police Department's policy and procedures said, in order to take an examination for the position of lieutenant, an officer must have at least 12 months of experience as a sergeant. Officer Malloy did not have 12 months of experience as a sergeant, so according to the Brookline's Brookline's policies and procedures, Officer Malloy should not have been able to take the examination. That was what Officer Hall told the Brookline Human Resources Department. In response, the director of Human Resources of the Human Resources Department told Officer Hall that actually Officer Malloy was allowed to take the exam and provided her reasons to Officer Hall. Hearing this, Officer Hall told the Human Resources Director that she wouldn't stand for that and that she would go to the press, the Select Board, and the town administrator. These are the other statements that Officer Hall was disciplined for making, saying that she would not accept the Human Resources interpretation of the law, and saying that she would tell the press and relevant public officials about what seemed to her to be a violation of the police department's policies and procedures. Now, our agency is obviously not here to decide whose interpretation of the applicable law on this matter is correct. That's not our role, but we can say that we've looked into the applicable law here, and without giving an opinion about who's right and who's wrong here, can say that Officer Hall was taking a very reasonable position when she said that the police department's policies and procedures should apply to Officer Malloy, and that the Brookline Police Department might have been violating its policy and procedures if it allowed Officer Malloy to sit for the lieutenant's exam. Nevertheless, the Brookline Police Department disciplined Officer Hall in part for continuing to state that the department was breaking its own policies and procedures, and for saying that she would tell the media and relevant public officials about the Brookline Police Department's alleged violations of its own policies and procedures. So in the end, the Brookline Police Department based its discipline of Officer Hall on two incidents, both of which involved sharing or saying that she would share what appeared to be her honestly held beliefs with relevant government officials about matters of public importance. Now, that brings us to Officer Hall's petition to remove the information about this discipline from the Commission's public database. She filed this petition only after she had retired from the Brookline Police Department and could no longer appeal her discipline through the normal appeals process. Just too much time had passed. And with that fact in mind, let me discuss some reasons why it might make sense for the Commission to leave the information in the Commission's public database and not remove it. First of all, the complaint was sustained and the discipline was issued. So maybe it's appropriate for the Commission's public database to continue displaying that information, because that information accurately reflects the complaint and discipline in this matter, and the database is there to report accurate information about such matters. That's one reason to keep the information in the database. Second, the Commission is not meant to serve as a board of appeals for disciplinary matters. If an officer is dissatisfied with the complaint or discipline, there are other avenues to address those things through a municipality's grievance process in some situations, or through an appeal to the Civil Service Commission, or in other ways. It depends on the situation. But Officer Hall did none of those things. So perhaps she missed her chance to deal with this matter and to have the information removed from the Commission's public database. Third, the regulations already provide a certain degree of relief. 555 CMR 8085 says that if an officer petitions the executive director to remove something from the public database and that request is denied, then the officer shall have the opportunity to submit a statement reflecting the petitioner's position regarding the data. And that statement will be included with any future dissemination of the data. So here, if Officer Hall's petition to remove the information is denied by the executive director, Officer Hall could provide a statement reflecting her own view on the matter, and that statement would be included in the database to give people her side of the story as well. The Commission might well decide that that process is the most appropriate way for the present matter to be resolved. Those are some reasons for the Commission to keep displaying the information in the database. The executive director is fully aware of those reasons, but he believes that the reasons to remove the information from the database are even stronger. Let me share those reasons with you now. First of all, Officer Hall can now no longer appeal this matter to the Civil Service Commission or through the internal grievance process because too much time has passed since the imposition of the discipline. But why would she not have simply appealed the matter to start with? And that brings me to the second point. This is a rare and unusual situation where the discipline itself may have deterred Officer Hall from appealing her discipline. After all, what is required in an appeal, whether the appeal is to a court, a human resources department, or the Civil Service Commission? An appeal requires sharing your beliefs with a relevant government official. And what was Officer Hall disciplined for? For sharing her beliefs with a relevant government official and for saying that she would do so. It is easy to see how the discipline here may well have deterred Officer Hall from pursuing her appeals. So while in most matters, the fact that an officer failed to appeal their discipline might mean that the officer should not later be able to remove that data from the Commissioner's public database, here the situation may be different because the discipline itself may have deterred her from pursuing her appellate rights. And what's more, not only might the discipline have deterred her, questions may be raised about whether the discipline violated her First Amendment rights and her rights under the Massachusetts whistleblower statute. The evidence, after all, does suggest that she was communicating her honestly held beliefs with relevant government officials about matters of public concern, to promote, namely, the promotion of a candidate who she honestly believed to have been unfit for the position of increased responsibility within her police department. And if Officer Hall had appealed her complaint and discipline and prevailed, then our regulations would have prevented us from displaying information about that complaint and discipline in our public database. That's to say, if she had appealed those issues before, she might have been able to remove then, through that process, the information which she's seeking to remove now through this process. Let me emphasize again the highly unusual situation here, where the officer may have prevailed if she had appealed her discipline when it was originally imposed, where the discipline itself very reasonably could have deterred that officer from bringing a timely appeal, and where the matter at hand deals with important issues both of public safety and of people's willingness to communicate honestly held beliefs with relevant public agencies. In summary, the commission is not in a position to undo the officer's discipline or vacate the complaint against her. But Officer Hall has asked that the commission remove information about her discipline and complaint from the commission's public database. The request does not fall squarely into any specific category that the regulations set forth for the removal of such information, but under 555 CMR 806 4B12, the commission is in a position to remove information regarding that discipline and complaint from our agency's public database. And for the reasons we've gone over with you today, the executive director is recommending that the commission exercise its authority under 555 CMR 806 4B12 for one of the complaints at issue here, complaint 6616, and vote to make information about that complaint and its discipline unavailable to the public. Thank you all for your attention and for your consideration of this matter. And with the permission of the chair, I'd be happy to answer any questions that you all might have. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that very thorough presentation, Jerry. Any questions or comments from the commissioners? Yes, Commissioner Crispin, please.
It's just one quick question. I know there are certain agencies that'll issue discipline in the form of oral reprimand, and usually under those circumstances, officers don't have the ability to appeal that. Are we opening up a door now if those decisions are posted on post website for those officers to then appeal the removal of those of that discipline?
Yeah. Oh, would you like to answer that, Enrique?
You go first. You go first, Jerry.
Yeah. No. So, thank you for asking that question. My view of that is no. Not in general. This is a highly unusual situation where the discipline itself reasonably could have deterred the officer from bringing her appeal in a timely way. So I don't think it's so much a matter of oral versus written, so much as the type of the discipline that was issued here and what she was disciplined for. And that's sort of a cabining principle as far as I see it. But please, Enrique, what would you like to add?
Yeah, Jerry touched on this briefly through his presentation, but we do not want to, open the door or become an arbitration option for the discipline. It's really just the uniqueness of this situation that we felt was necessary to bring to you, because we also felt I don't have the authority to just unilaterally agree with one side or the other. Let me just one word on oral reprimands. They are not currently in the display typically, the oral reprimands in our public database. We do capture them sometimes when they're documented, because these days everybody documents even oral reprimands, but they're not necessarily in the public database.
Thank you, Enrique. Commissioner Calderon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm just going to shorten it to make sure I understand exactly what we're doing. So the officer's looking for it to be removed. In her opinion, she's exercising her First Amendment right, wrongfully disciplined because the city or town of Newton town of Brookline paid her an over $1 million settlement, and she just wants to remove that. And if we vote yes, we're removing it. Am I correct on all that? Yeah. All right. Thank you. Thank you.
Commissioner Cash Erosion, please.
Thank you. I also want to just make sure I understand, is the primary reason why, Mr. Executive Director, you believe it's appropriate to remove this is because of the concern that the discipline itself chilled her ability to appeal? Is that the primary reason? And I just asked because it didn't seem to chill her the first time she did it, the second time she did it. But if that's your primary reason, I respect that. So I just want to make sure I understand.
Yeah, and the fact that she has no longer any recourse as to the display, because she's gone from the department, they parted ways, etc. And now the only thing that remains is this record in the public database.
Understood. Thank you.
But you're asking us to do it largely on the basis that you feel it was an honestly held belief?
Yes. And by the way, we have a vested interest in that, in people reporting to us general matters where they, of wrongdoing within their police departments. Um, if that were to be the case, we don't want to send a message of chilling effect for reporting those things.
But how can you determine honestly held belief without making a determination of credibility after some sort of interaction with the individual in question?
Well, through the history of the document, which is extensive, I think, Jerry, do you want to speak a little bit to that?
Yeah, sure. So, I think the question is, why do we think that this may be an honestly held belief? And there's two instances. First is the second one was where she was saying that the Brookline Police Department may have violated their policies and procedures, and that does seem, not to say whether it's right or wrong, but seems to be a reasonable interpretation of how the regulations may be construed. And the first instance was when she said that the officer may be defrauding or attempting to defraud the town and the civil service. And with that, there's a number of reasons why it seems, based on the documentation that we have, that may be an honestly held belief. Don't want to get too far into the weeds, but it has to do with a date of permanent employment, and whether Officer Malloy put the correct date of permanent employment in her application materials. Other people, aside from Officer Hall, said that there's confusion on the matter. There's also the fact that the date of permanent employment, it makes intuitive sense that it would be the date when someone starts at their place of employment rather than the date when they start their academy. And that was the issue, whether Officer Malloy put one date versus the other. There's also the fact that historically people used to have been sworn in at one time at the beginning of the academy and other times at the end of the academy, adding to the confusion. There's also the fact that here, even years later, when an investigator asked her about the matter, she seemed adamant, without hesitation, without doubt, about the fact that in her mind that Officer Malloy had lied about it. So there's indications within the records that we have that would lead a person, not saying 100% sure, but that she likely had this as a honestly held belief, even as to the first instance as well. So there is indications in the document that support her belief in this matter as well.
Thank you. Any other questions from the commissioners? And so finally, Jerry, again, what you're asking us to vote on, just explain.
Yes, please. I'd be asking whether the commission under 555 CMR 806 4B12 might take a vote on whether to make the information about complaint 6616 and its related discipline unavailable to the public. A yes vote would mean that the commission would use 555 CMR 806 4B12 to make this information unavailable to the general public, and a no vote would mean that the commission would not use 555 CMR 806 4B12 to make that information unavailable to the public. That's to say, a yes vote would take that information out of the public database, and a no vote would leave that information within the database.
Thank you. I'll ask for a vote. I have just received word from Commissioner Crispin that he has had to leave us because he has another meeting. So at this moment in time, we still have a quorum, but we have only 8 commissioners. So Commissioner Baker, please.
So that no vote, and I just want to make clear that the no vote gives that person the opportunity to put that explanation next to it, correct?
That's correct. They would have the opportunity if they submit statement. Well, the process would be if the executive director denies their petition to remove, then they'd have the opportunity to submit a statement, which would then be included with the data going forth.
That's the way I would vote. No.
Thank you. Commissioner Bluestone.
Yes.
Yeah, you know what,
Calder?
Madam Chair, I'm a yes. I'm all set. I'll take my hand down.
So Commissioner Baker is a no. Commissioner Bluestone, I think you said yes.
Yes.
Did you? And Commissioner Calderon says yes. Thank you. Commissioner Hall,
Yes.
Commissioner Kazarosian.
You're muted, Commissioner. He says yes.
You're muted.
Oh my God, yes, sorry.
Commissioner Luma,
Yes.
Commissioner Talley.
Yes.
And I am a no on this, but the yes votes carry. Thank you very much for your presentation, Jerry. And we move on now to agency certification standards. Turn it over to our general counsel, please.
Thank you, and I will turn the floor over to Counsel Annie Lee.
Good morning, Madam Chair and Commissioners. As you'll recall, one of our legal fellows, George Boateng, previously presented this standard on detainee transportation, which is back before you today. So I'll turn it over to George.
Good morning, Commissioners. I hope that my screen is sharing and that you all are able to see my screen. And so I will start. Well, good morning, Commissioners. As I said, my name is George Boateng, and I'm a legal fellow here at Post. I'll be presenting on the revisions to the detainee transportation standard following feedback from various sources that includes the Municipal Police Training Committee, MPTC, and the Massachusetts Chief of Police Association, MACOPA. The standard regarding detainee transportation was first presented to the Commission during its September 2025 meeting. I'm presenting the various revisions for further discussions and feedback and not for preliminary approval. I will be directing your attention particularly to the subsections in yellow, which are officer conduct, transport vehicles, searches, restraints, supervision and surveillance, and transportation considerations. So beginning with officer conduct, the initial draft provided that an agency's detainee transportation policy should encourage officers to explain to the detainee what the officer is doing and why, where the detainee is being transported and why, and any applicable next steps. MACOPA's letter and feedback from the MPTC emphasized that this is not always possible, that it is not always possible to verbally engage with a detainee. So adding the when time and circumstances reasonably permit language provides a reasonable way to account for unexpected circumstances. As you can see in the revision, and as you can see on the screen, our revision reflects this change. Next, we have transport vehicles. The revised draft offers an edit that incorporates feedback from MACOPA. The provision now directs officers to search the parts of the transport vehicle reasonably accessible to a detainee. And we move on to searches. The initial draft directed agencies to set forth procedures on searching a detainee that includes a requirement to do so in the least intrusive and most effective manner necessary to safely and effectively transport the detainee without humiliating or demeaning the detainee. There were discussions concerning the ambiguity and subjectiveness of the phrases, the least intrusive and most effective manner, and transport the detainee without humiliating or demeaning the detainee. To address those concerns, the revised draft directs officers to search detainee in the least intrusive manner that is effective to safely and effectively transport the detainee in accordance with applicable laws. And for restraints, here the initial draft directed agencies to set forth a requirement to restrain the detainee, which shall be done in the least intrusive and restrictive manner necessarily to safely and effectively transport. Similarly, there were feedback that the requirements to restrain a detainee in the least intrusive and restrictive manner was potentially ambiguous without a clear operational example. The revised draft provides clarity to this directive by specifying that handcuffing may be an acceptable manner of restraining a detainee. And next we have supervision and surveillance. Here, the initial drafts direct officers to keep the detainee under constant supervision and surveillance. We received feedback about the feasibility of keeping a detainee under constant supervision and surveillance, particularly for smaller agencies that tend to operate single officer patrol units and may not have 2 officer capacity for routine transports. As a result to these on-the-ground concerns, the revision proposes that officers be required to keep a detainee under regular supervision and surveillance. And lastly, we have transportation considerations. The initial draft provides that agencies have a requirement to transport the detainee with at least 1 officer whose gender identity matches the gender identity of the detainee when time and circumstances reasonably permit. The MPTC and MACOPA raised concerns about this provision relating to the staffing and operational challenges of agencies. In robust discussions with MPTC, there were various options, and some of these options were 1, to keep the original provision, 2, to completely remove the provision, or 3, to rewrite the provision entirely. What is before the Commission is a summation of all the different suggestions from the MPTC and MACOPA concerning the limitation of agencies, while still being sensitive to preserving the humanity, dignity, and autonomy of all detainees. And so these are the revisions that we do have now, and I'm very happy to answer any questions or help with any confusions that anyone here may have. So once again, thank you very much, Commissioners. And I'll stop sharing my screen now.
George, thank you very much for that excellent presentation. Any questions or comments at this point from my fellow commissioners? I don't think I see anything, and we are not expected to take a vote today on this, correct, Randy? Again, thank you very much, George.
Thank you.
I think we move on now to item number 7 on our agenda. There are no matters which were not anticipated by me at the time of posting. I would now entertain a motion to go into executive session in accordance with General Laws, Chapter 38, Section 21A1, to discuss the discipline or the dismissal of or complaints or charges brought against a public officer, employee, or individual under the same statute, but Section 21A5, to discuss the investigation of charges of criminal misconduct under the same statute, but Section 21A7 combined with Chapter 6E of the General Laws, Section 8C2, and to the extent that they may be applicable, General Laws, Chapter 6, Sections 168 and 178, and Chapter 119, Section 5E of the general laws to the extent matters relating to preliminary inquiries and initial staff review concerning whether to initiate such inquiries and regarding certain criminal record information and the reporting of suspected child abuse or neglect, and under the same statute, but Section 21A7 combined with Sections 22F and G of the statute to discuss and to approve prior executive session minutes. We would be addressing the Division of Standards request to enter voluntary decertification, suspension, or disposition agreement in one case. We would be addressing standards request for approval to conduct preliminary inquiries and or to impose a suspension in 6 cases. We would also be addressing the request for removal of information from the website submitted by Donald Spalding, and a request for relinquishment of certification from John Landers, formerly of the Northeastern University Police Department. And finally, we would be addressing approval of the minutes of the executive session of November 20th, 2025. Is there a motion to go into executive session?
I'll make
So
the
moved.
Is there a second?
I'll do either one.
Thank you. Commissioner Baker,
Yes.
Commissioner Bluestone,
Yes.
Commissioner Calderon,
Yes.
Commissioner Hall,
Yes.
Commissioner Keserosian,
Yes.
Commissioner Luma,
Yeah.
Commissioner Talley.
Yes.
I'm also a yes. That's unanimously carried by the commissioners in attendance. Members of the public, we will not be returning to the public meeting after our executive session. Thank you very, very much, members of the public. Enrique, do you want to just remind them if they want to communicate with the commission, how they might do that?
Yes, thank you. Just go to our website, mapostcommission.gov, or send us an email to postc-comments@mass.gov.
Thank you. Let me thank members of the staff who have participated with those who have today addressed us. We are very grateful, the commissioners are, for all the information we've been provided as we address the matters that have been on the agenda. And I thank the members of the public who have attended. With that, we will take a 5-minute recess, and then we will be moving into the executive session. Thank you again very much. Happy holidays to all members of the public who've attended.